Welcome to our webinar today, talking about the Disability Royal Commission's issues paper on developing inclusion. My name is Troy Hester. If this is the first webinar you've seen of mine, I work for an organisation called Family Advocacy, and my role here is to help people to connect and to talk with the Disability Royal Commission. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we come together from many different country across this great land. I'm coming in today from Darug country, and I want to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging, and pay my respects and and acknowledge the fact that this is a land that I've only recently come to. Just a little bit about family advocacy. Family Advocacy is a New South Wales-wide independent disability advocacy organisation, and we work with families to undertake advocacy with and on behalf of their family member with disability. We were founded by members who are concerned about the rights and interests of their family member with disability, and we continue to be governed and staffed by families and allies. We provide advocacy advice and support. We undertake systems advocacy, and my role currently supports engagement with the Disability Royal Commission. And our office sits on Darug country in Hornsby, New South Wales. So just a content warning as we get started. Obviously, the Disability Royal Commission is looking at matters of abuse, violence, exploitation and neglect. And these are very highly emotive topics. We'll just be talking generally about these topics today, but I urge you, if you need to, feel free to stop the webinar, take a break. There is free emotional support and counselling available to anybody who is interested in talking to the Disability Royal Commission or who works in that field. And the number for Blue Knot, who provide that, is 1-800-421-468. We will be recording this webinar today, so feel free to come back to it to watch it again or to pick it up from wherever it is that you left it behind. Going in the right direction. So in our webinar today, this webinar is based on the issues paper from the Disability Royal Commission on promoting inclusion. I won't be covering everything in it. I won't be covering all the questions that are linked to it, but I'll grab different pieces from the issues paper and be talking about them during this time together. I notice we're well over 50 people here today, and that's the reason why we're doing it in this format rather than in a Zoom meeting. Today's webinar is very much conscious. I'm very much conscious that you are the voice of experience. Wherever you are, whatever your experience is, you are able to speak from your experience. And that's what the Commission is interested in as well, in hearing from your voice of experience. We've also made this webinar practical, so you walk away with something concrete. I understand that you may have lots of things that you want to say to the Commission on this topic, and it might take you much longer than what we get done on this webinar, but sometimes the hardest thing is to get something down. And we've put this webinar together so that you will have something down and you can send it straight through to the Disability Royal Commission at the end of this webinar. You can always put in more than one submission or more than one response to an issues paper. So don't feel that you need to have everything right or that you have to have everything complete before you start. Just some housekeeping. As I say, this is in a webinar format because we've got, I can see 46 plus 17, I think, participants happening here. You won't be able to actually talk into the meeting, but please use the chat function to contribute at any point. You probably have all received an email from me, which has a copy of the questions that we're going to cover today. And I'd really urge you to find a way that you can take notes. Now, if you're a pen and paper type person, grab a pen and paper. If you could have the Word document open, or the other thing you can do is you can record your answers on your telephone and just come back to them later. So whatever way works for you, I'd encourage you to have something there. And there will be pauses during this webinar so that you can actually record some things. We may have some time to answer things at the end, and we'll see how we go for time. We can also arrange a small group via Zoom, so we can discuss issues or we can answer questions. Sometimes it's helpful to have a few people together, and then we can all draw from each other's wisdom and each other's ideas. And that's somewhat what we're going to try and do today. We do have a feedback form, and I'd ask if you could fill it in the feedback form. We'll email it to you, and it will pop up again at the end of this event. So getting into issues papers, really, issues papers are one way that the Disability Royal Commission is interested in getting your expertise and getting your opinion on things. The other way is when you put in a general submission. Issues papers are focused on specific topics. So this one is on developing inclusion. The one previous to this was on violence in the home. One prior to that was on quality and safeguards. And there's a total of 12 issues papers that have come out just focused on specific topics. These issues papers are used for research. So your response to the issues paper feeds straight back into the research section of the Disability Royal Commission. And they're looking for your voice of experience. The Commission has a lot of people working on them, but nobody with your experience. And that's where your contribution is really valuable. They're different from making a submission. You can make a submission at any time about anything that's affected you or anything that you've seen concerning violence, abuse, neglect, or exploitation of a person with disability. And that can be as complex and as general and have a lot of different issues. This is just focusing on one issue, and you can do submissions and responses. They don't get in the way of each other. There are questions at the end of every issues paper, and they are there as a guide. If you read the fine print on the issues paper, it says answer as many of these questions as is helpful, and you don't have to answer any of them. They're there to help you, to prompt you in making that submission. If you want to find where the issues papers are, they're at the Disability Royal Commission's website, which is, the address is here. If you scroll along the top, you might not see that on your screen, but there is a category called Document Library. And then on the left-hand side, you need to click Issues Papers. And there you'll find what's currently 12 issues papers. And the latest here is promoting inclusion. And you can download that in an easy English version, or in Word, or as a PDF. If you have any troubles getting a copy of that and you'd like me to send you one, you can contact me and my details are there. Okay, so in terms of responding to an issues paper, these are the things the Royal Commission is interested in hearing. What's really going on? From your place, from your situation, from your vantage point, tell the Commission what's really going on, not what somebody said in policy, not what some department said, not what other people say, what's really going on and what works in practice. And they're interested in what's working, and whether that's here in New South Wales or in Queensland or in Canada or in the UK, anywhere that something is working well, they're interested in having good examples of what works. They're also interested in hearing what doesn't work. So where are the gaps? Where are the things that need to be changed? And that's a key part to what the Commission investigates and the recommendations that they make. Also talk about why something doesn't work for you or somebody like you. Maybe this part of inclusion works for 90% of people with disability, but it doesn't work for you. Or maybe it works for 60% of people with your type of disability, but because of your age, because of your ethnic background, because of your sexual orientation, it doesn't work for you. Or maybe because, maybe because you're Aboriginal and you're young and you're in prison, then it doesn't work for you. So it's what doesn't work for you. And that's a really important part of research that the Commission needs to hear about. As you put in a response to an issues paper, you can build the case for the changes that need to happen. So give some detail about why these changes will work, why the current system is not working, while it looks like it works over here, it doesn't work for you. So take some time to do that as well. Okay, I've broken this webinar up into 3 different sections. And the first one, I'm just going to talk generally about inclusion. Now, I understand that there are a lot of different definitions of inclusion out there. I just want to grab this example here. This is Malala, who, as you probably have seen her face, she's a very strong advocate for the education of girls, particularly in primary school and high school. And she has an international presence and has actually won a Nobel Prize for her work there. When we think about women in education and girls in education, that's not so much an issue in Australia. And we would find it really strange if somebody said, you know, you can't go to school because you're a girl. But that's not universally true. It used to be, though. There was a time when even in Australia, it was, particularly in universities, then there were certain views, certain attitudes to women in education. That's changed. And that's just an example of how we can become more inclusive, and we can make changes to things so that they're a normal part of the way that we think about things, that our attitudes change. The same might be true if, if you were discriminated against in applying for a job because you wore glasses. People would think that would be really strange. But why are you, if I wear glasses, if this person uses glasses and this person uses a wheelchair, why should there be any difference in attitude to somebody being able to complete their job? But let's hear from you. Here's a time where I'd like you to spend some time writing down what your understanding of inclusion is. And this is actually the first question on the issues paper, which I haven't pulled up yet, but I'll do that in a second. So I'm going to give you a minute now, and it's going to seem a bit strange because I'm not going to talk for a minute, but I want you to write down from your understanding and experience, what is inclusion? And after a minute, we'll continue on. Thanks. All right, I'll try and bring that up at some other point. Just in terms of what other people, what some of you have written in and said, inclusion is about accepting and valuing all people in society, regardless of race, religion, cultural background, sexuality, and disability. Giving people the same rights, welcoming diversity, to enable people to participate in what's on offer to their fullest potential. Somebody else said to be accepted for who you are and to accept others for who they are. A sense of belonging, a life without segregation, making spaces that are accessible to all and where genuine collaboration can occur. So you can see that people have slightly different ideas, but a general, and the Commission is interested in hearing what you understand inclusion to be, and that's the first question on their paper. Just a little about the Disability Royal Commission's approach. With all of the issues and with all of the issues papers, they look at things through these 3 lenses. The first is human rights, and because the right to be free of neglect, exploitation, violence, and abuse is a basic human right, and the Disability Royal Commission draws from a number of different sources looking at this, including the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The Commission also looks at things right across the whole of life. So their brief is to cover anybody with any kind of disability at any age, at any stage of life. And so when it comes to talking about inclusion, then that is very relevant, because inclusion during somebody's early years may have lifelong effects throughout the whole of life. And so we'll talk about that a bit too. And the third lens that the Commission always brings is the intersectionality. So what does it mean to not only be a person with disability, but to be of a certain age, of a certain gender, of from an Aboriginal background? How do those things interplay across things? Because it's not just the same experience for everybody. In the issues paper, the Commission quotes from some of the comments that the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has made from the UN. And so one of them is this one: accessible services, including environments, transportation, information and communication, including interpreting and translation services, are a precondition for the inclusion of people with disability in their local communities and for them to have an independent life. Being in the community includes living a full social life and having access to all services. Being in the community involves having access to all measures and events of political and cultural life in the community and any other activity in which a person with disability wishes to participate. I should point out, and the Commission points out, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability doesn't give a definition of inclusion, but these are some of the things it says around inclusion from their different comments. Here's one. Full and effective participation involves including people with disability in a range of decision-making bodies at local through to national levels. So you can see inclusion has a lot of different dimensions to it. All right, I'm going to give you another chance to write. And the idea is that once we've got all of these things, that you can send them straight off to the Commission if you want, or use them as further thinking. So here's a question: is Australia an inclusive society? If not, why not? I'm going to give you another minute. And I know a minute's not a long time. And then I'll share what some of the responses I've already received from you. Okay, so here is what I've already received from some people. Australia inclusive? Not yet. We've experienced judgment, gatekeeping, and unwanted advice on where our 5-year-old daughter goes to school. It's more inclusive than a few years ago, but there are still many barriers. The main barrier being attitudes and understanding. No, we're not an inclusive society, as we tend to have a top-down approach when, for example, deciding on disability policy. Despite many written and spoken policies, there are still many gaps. And this person said it's due to a lack of knowledge and fear of how it will affect the hierarchy of the existing social structure. This person said there are grades of inclusiveness. We might be inclusive in theory, but not practically. A law against discrimination won't always prevent somebody being denied employment or promotional opportunities due to disability. All of these comments are comments that I've received from participants. A ramp at a courthouse does not always translate to inclusiveness in the courtroom. People with disability can be disadvantaged without adequate supports or time breaks to allow them to fully participate and therefore be fully heard in the hearing. That's a great example of how something can look inclusive, but actually still have a long way to go. Sadly, Australia is not an inclusive society. We continue to educate in segregated settings and house an alternative segregated accommodation. Yeah, and that form of segregation will come up again. Okay, so they're comments that I've received from people who sent them to me. So one of the questions is, why is the Royal Commission promoting inclusion? Why did they choose this to be one of their issues papers? Their comment was, research has shown the benefits of inclusion, both for people with disability and the wider society. And I think that's a really important bit. It's not just about the benefit for a person with disability, but the whole of society benefits from this. This is from the issues paper, page 2. However, the Commission says, promoting an inclusive society in Australia is a continuing challenge, and this work is far from complete. So everybody who said, no, we've still got a way to go, the Commission is very much in agreement with you. Time to write again. From your understanding and experience, give an example of inclusion, where a good example of inclusion, and give an example of not inclusion, either an example where something is the opposite of an inclusion, or an example where it might look like being inclusive, but it actually isn't, or it doesn't work for this cohort of people. Okay, I'm sure there's a lot more that you can say. Let's continue. The Commission, in its issues paper, also gives a list of some of the barriers, and they identify negative attitudes, assumptions, and low expectations, ableism, and they give a definition of what ableism is. They talk about double discrimination, which is the interaction between ableism, racism, sexism, ageism, homophobia, and social economic factors. So that's what we're talking about before, about that intersectionality, where it's not just ableism, but ableism plus sexism, or ableism plus ageism, or other social economic factors. They say that one of the barriers is a lack of respect for people with disability around autonomy, independence, and interdependence. One of the barriers is inaccessible environments, and they're not just talking about physically inaccessible. Public spaces, transportation, facilities, information and communication, and that's a big one that we saw particularly around the bushfires and with COVID. How do people get the information, and how accessible is the information? Barriers around culture, lack of culturally appropriate supports, including in different languages, but also being aware of some of the cultural barriers that may be there. And supports provided only in separate and segregated settings. This is something that came up in a comment. It's one of the barriers that the Commission has identified as being a problem to things being actually inclusive. If a service is only provided over there, then it's not really inclusive. If you say, okay, I mean, I'll go back to the bushfire example. If you have to receive all of your communication via text and your mobile phone is not available, then that's not being inclusive. If we say, yes, you can only receive education if you go over there, or you can only live in that place or in the capital city, then they're barriers to actually us being inclusive as a whole society. You've probably just had a whole lot of things jump through your head. What barriers have you experienced? What barriers have you seen? What barriers do you know are there? I'll give you a minute again. Just moving on. So the next section that I want to look at is to do with that idea of the whole of life and the impact and consequences of inclusion or a lack of inclusion. There's one story that I've heard of somebody who had cerebral palsy, who finds it difficult to get into a nightclub, has been turned away from a number of nightclubs because the people on the door think that they're drunk. And so that they're actually being denied entry. Now, the impact of that, them not being able to have that access, is not just that particular time. If you think of an example of somebody who goes to a nightclub for a bucks night, or if I'm part of the queer community and there's a queer event happening at a particular venue and I can't get in because of my physical disability and the attitudes that I encounter at the door, then that has a consequence in terms of community. As well as it's more than just a night's entertainment. If I can't go to a bucks night with my friends, if I can't be part of that community event, cultural event, then that can have an impact. And if that's my regular experience, then that compounds the impact going forward. So that's one of the other things to think about when it comes to inclusion. And it's particularly as if thinking across the whole of life, the impact of inclusion or the lack of inclusion. Just throwing up, this is an example of a diagram which is based on real research where somebody looked at what might be considered a normal pathway for a child through the whole of life, and then what it might look like if that child progresses down a segregated pathway. Now, it's not that neither of these pathways are fixed, but one, once you start on the segregated pathway, according to this research, it's very easy to continue on a segregated pathway. So the impact of inclusion is that what happens early on can have an impact much later on in life. And it doesn't mean that the pathway can't be changed, but there are impacts, there are consequences to inclusion. And I'm going to ask you to come up with an example of the impact of inclusion, either positive or negative. Now, it might be something that's happened in history, something that's happened before, something that used to happen, which has an impact now. So you can see the impacts now of inclusion before. Or you can be looking at a situation now and looking at the inclusion, because it can be a positive example, the impact of inclusion now and the consequence that that's going to have in the future. So both of those things are relevant to the Commission. They're looking at the whole of life and they're looking at how inclusion affects people at different points in their life, particularly in terms of transition. That transition from primary school to high school to further study or to work, moving out of home, retirement, all of these time points and what people experience can be positive or negative, and that can have a consequence. So I'm going to pause again, practicing my pausing. I understand you're not going to have enough time to write down everything, but if you jot down a few dot points, that might help you too. I'll be able to come back to them a bit later. I'll just say one other thing about the Disability Royal Commission. You don't have to give them information just in text. You can use pictures, you can use video, you can use audio, you can do a circle with, this is what happened here, arrow, circle of what the consequence was. Because I know that's not enough time. But hopefully we've captured something. I'm going to move on. The last thing I'm going to focus on is the Commission really would like your input on what is a practical and sustainable change. What needs to happen? How does it need to change? And what's going to be sustainable in the long term? And they want you to think about organisations, government departments, particular settings, what's happening in your local community. What are some practical and sustainable changes that will make a difference to society being more inclusive, or that workplace being more inclusive, or that school being more inclusive? So I'm going to give you, just in a moment, I'm going to ask you to give an example. No, sorry, gone the wrong way. Here's an example about inclusive education. At Family Advocacy, we're very big on inclusive education. This is what the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities said about inclusive education. They said, it is a fundamental human right of all learners. It is a principle that values the well-being of all students and respects the inherent dignity and autonomy, and acknowledges the individual requirements and ability to effectively be included in and contribute to society. Inclusive education is a means to realizing other human rights, and it's the result of a process. So changes to culture, policy, and practice will then effectively include and accommodate all students. So that's one example of a change. With more inclusive education will bring changes. So I'm going to ask you some practical steps in a moment. I'm going to give you one more example first. This is one that came up just this week, and I thought was very relevant. So in the news, you may have seen in Victoria, the Victorian Mental Health Royal Commission put out their recommendations, and very encouragingly, the Victorian government has said that they will adopt all of the Royal Commission's recommendations around mental health. And some of those were that there would be more community-based adult mental health services across the state of Victoria, that there would be services specific to young people under 26. And this one I like, that mental health crises 000 calls would go to the ambulance instead of the police. So that's in some ways that's a small change, but the impact of that could be amazing. And that every region, every hospital, that in every region of Victoria, there will be hospitals with specific mental health crisis resources, so that you don't have to travel halfway across the state in order to have that care. So that is a great example of a Royal Commission giving recommendations and a government taking up those recommendations. So in the spirit of thinking about the Disability Royal Commission and what recommendations we'd like them to put forward, so that governments and organisations can take them up. From your experience, what are some practical steps? What are some sustainable steps? What changes should be made to government department policy? What changes should be seen across all organisational cultures? What are changes to classroom practice, to healthcare staff training? The Royal Commission's had a few public hearings on hearing from healthcare staff. Okay, and again, I'm sure there's lots you can say on that matter, but I'm going to move on. Just to summarize again, when you respond to an issues paper, this one's on developing an inclusion, there'll be other issues papers that come out, I imagine. Your voice is valuable because only you have your experience, and you can give information and point out things that nobody else will, that nobody else might even be aware of. You can talk about what's going on, what works in practice, and what doesn't work.
and why something doesn't work for you or someone like you. And again, build the case for the changes that you think need to happen and what they might want to change to. The Commission asks for good examples and for great ideas, innovative ideas to change things practically. Every issues paper has a closing date, and this issues paper, the closing date is the 2nd of April. Now, you can continue to put in your ideas about inclusion right up until the end of the Royal Commission. That doesn't change. But in terms of this research collection activity, they put closing dates on it so that they can, be able to gather that collection together for their research. So you still have a couple of weeks. So you can send something today, and you can send something later on. In terms of sending it in, if you'd like to, you can make a telephone submission. So you can ring up 1-800-517-199 and you can say, I want to give you my response to the Promoting Inclusions Issues paper, and you can do that over the phone. You can email to drcinquiries@royalcommission.gov.au, and this is the website. If you have any questions that you want legal answers to, the number is there, counselling support line, and if you'd like to talk to me, you can talk to me here. If you're interested in some of the other webinars that we've done, one on what the Royal Commission is, the last one we did focuses in more detail on what an issues paper is. If you'd like to hear what other parents have experienced in talking to the Disability Royal Commission, you can find your videos through our website, which is listed here. Just keep in contact with us. So we, at Family Advocacy, we do a lot of advocacy and support, particularly for people who have a family member with disability. I do a lot of talking with people who have disability, whatever your background, wherever you're coming from, and we're across the state. We also have an arm called Resourcing Inclusive Communities, which is all about capacity building. And we do things around peer networks. We do things around supporting people from school to work and helping to build capacity for people. If you'd like more information, and we've got a bunch of really good resources, you can contact us on those things there too. Thank you very much for your participation. We've got just a few minutes at the end. There will be a feedback form. If you'd like to continue the conversation with me individually, please be in touch. If you'd like to be part of a group to talk through some of these things, then get in touch again and we will set up a group. We'd love to be able to provide that support to you as well. Now I'm going to hear from Karen. Oh, I'm actually just going to see if I can get out of this PowerPoint and just show you the actual, oh dear, okay. Just going to show you the issues paper just before I finish. So this is the issues paper we've been talking about, Promoting Inclusion issues paper. Careful, I'm going to scroll through it really quickly here. Human Rights Life Course. I'm just going to scroll down to the questions. First question, what does inclusion mean to you? Second question, what makes an inclusive society? There are a total of 9 questions on the issues paper. And the last one is there anything else we should know? So you can grab that issues paper and you can look at those questions in more detail. Okay. I will try and hand over and see if there are any questions that we have. Karen.
Oh, took a few clicks to unmute me.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks, Troy. Let's see. There were some questions through the presentation that I jumped on and answered, but let's see if we've got some new ones now. I've got a couple of comments, which is good, about people falling through the gap around NDIS, for instance, in the rollout and access, and particularly for people with mental health and the continuity of support. So no doubt that's been some experience that a few people have had, and that would be excellent to talk to in a submission. And hopefully you've made some comments already in today with the way Troy has worked the webinar, so so that you're off ready to go with that. Let me just see what the other, if there's some questions more or comments. Certainly some things from someone around improved knowledge from speech therapists, etc., in terms of particularly communication needs, you know, regards to text, QWERTY board, iPad, computers, various things, but improved knowledge around tech and communication technologies. Actually, you know, there's been a couple of comments on that and ACC. So that is absolutely important. Clara's put in the SurveyMonkey feedback form, so appreciate your comments on that. Someone's asked us to pop up the inclusion diagram again. Is that the two pathways, Sue, that you're talking to there? I think that must be the one, Troy, if you could find that quickly. Right, and then regional services, yeah, particularly mental health and allied health professionals. Waiting lists are enormous. Actually, I get a lot of calls from people in metro areas as well, Kylie, where there's just not service or not the service or the person that actually is going to be the right fit for the individual. So I think that is you know, obviously worse probably in regional areas, but definitely an issue when we're trying to be very unique in our response to people with disabilities and be effective. The survey will also appear when you exit the webinar, says Clara. So anything specific to ask us now, people? You've got to, I know people are heading out, probably hungry for lunch, but we're here till 1:30 to answer anything specific you might have, or further comment as well is appreciated. Okay, there's that inclusion diagram, which can be quite confronting, but it has been done through a literary review that Professor Jackson did over 4 decades worth of literature around impacts for people with disability on when it's segregated versus a inclusive experience, as we say here, and the aggregate impact is that you know, parallel pathway where, you know, early segregation can lead to further and ongoing segregation that leads to isolated adult lives. And it's being aware, paying attention to that so that we can actually make changes happen. And Troy actually commented on our capacity building area, resourcing inclusive communities, and this is what they're working on. They're working on really helping people understand and build the capacity to jump up to that top line and to have that as their lived experience. So a couple more things in the chat. Will overheads be available after the webinar? Troy, I don't think we actually send the PDF of the webinar, but we've recorded it. So you will certainly have that recorded to rewatch.
And definitely, if there's something specific that somebody that you're interested in seeing, again, very happy to share from some of the resources.
Absolutely. Supporting schools to encourage least restrictive practice where possible, providing opportunities for students to enable them to participate on the same basis as their peers. Absolutely. And I mean, as you're probably aware, Sue, too, the NDIS Safeguards Commission has a mandate to actually eliminate, is their word, reduce and eliminate restrictive practice because it's seen as not an effective measure to support people, whether it's at school or in other contexts. So, you know, clearly we should be doing this in our school systems as well and finding other methods to support people. Interested in your thoughts on the impact, sorry, it's just flicked up. Impact and effectiveness of disability inclusion action plans in creating a more inclusive society. So the disability inclusion action plans were local councils having to do a plan in there for their LGA. Have they been effective in creating? I've actually looked through a lot of the council's plans that have come out, really, really varying amongst the councils. Some have been very effective. They've had people really on their panels working as working groups to get them right. And I think the impacts will be, you know, more medium term than short term. So we'll be having to monitor how that's going. However, some have been really scant, and they're basically, you know, really looking at physical access and those kind of things that should be out there in our communities, clearly physical access, but often haven't penetrated beyond that. So mixed bag is how I would say it, but certainly a great a bit like the NDIA, great ethos, great starting point, but it needs to just then be continued to be monitored, I guess. And as a systemic advocacy organisation as well, we've certainly responded to those and to certain state council level to try and influence the impact of what that could do. But step forward. Yeah, sorry, Troy.
Just talking to that, Karen, that's a great example. A lot of these council DIAPs are great examples of how the council might truly genuinely believe that what they've done has improved inclusion, but it might not have worked. And getting the voice of experience to actually feed into that is really important, whether that's at a council level through one of their committees, and definitely it can go to the Disability Royal Commission as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. What's Susan saying? I wouldn't even call it a parallel pathway. Yeah, I know. As soon as I said parallel, Bob actually does call it a parallel pathway, but I find that it's a divergent pathway. You're right. And I do prefer that word with an increasing gap. Yes. Thank you. Chris Diepps came into my mind for practical changes. Are at best lip service. Yes, yeah, it has been a mixed bag with those, but Troy makes a good point there, and that's part of our, as I said, systemic work to really counter and say, look, just because you've had a mandate that local councils have to do one, and they've all had, their deadline, and there's one done, that's not the end of it. And how good was it? And really, be pushing for that to be an effective tool and not a tick box tool. The final, could you put the final contact slide up, Troy?
On the final contact slide.
Or get your phones out and take a photo. Some LGAs aren't even addressing physical access adequately, yeah. And, in many ways, that's the obvious one, isn't it? But, yeah. There's often too, I know certainly I was up in Bathurst, and there was just really, which happens across our governments all the time, is a real disconnect where local councils are saying, oh, state council business, state council says local council business, and, it goes round and round in circles, pathways and drives and various things. So there's sometimes that kind of, finger pointing going on too, which is just frustrating, but makes everything much harder. Kylie mentioned, I'm quite concerned as to treatment of women who have disabilities who experience domestic violence. Absolutely. In particular where there's a long-term mental health implications and how this is treated when they try to access services. Absolutely.
And I know of a couple of people who are feeding into the Disability Royal Commission right on those issues as well.
Definitely, and it is re-traumatising, and that's very much understood. So, the Blue Knot, I don't know if you want to put that one back up now too, Troy, but certainly the Blue Knot counselling service that's being put on with this Royal Commission is somewhere to reach out to, because you want to get your voice heard, but obviously it can be very traumatising to do that, but that's there to try and assist. Right. Still barriers with TAFE for some students needing support in class. TAFE can be, they have got a disability support, but they don't, they can be very limiting. So it's really, as in most things in terms of this stuff, is advocating very strongly, continuing to do that, to find that person that's going to make it work in the TAFE, and using NDIS funds to have your own support person if you're self-managing or plan managing, to be the one going in there and supporting well. But yes, TAFE, no institution is got it perfect. It's often about the humans within the institution as well, of course. Parallel universe. Completely agree, Penny. TAFE is a long way to go, like the school system. Local councils can be adverse to disabilities like autism. Even in community land care, they have checks that have to be overcome. Shoalhaven came and investigated before giving permission. They did give permission, however, that was because the locals were supportive, about community, isn't it? Relationship building, letting people understand what's the need, not assuming that our government at any level is going to get that right straight away either. Please, Troy, just jump in as you want as well. And now we're not just a parallel universe, we're a galaxy far, far away, says Susan. Oh dear, yeah. Hey, yes. This is a chance, right? This is a chance for that galaxy to get closer, that Milky Way to come together, by putting submissions in, talking to the Commission, and getting your voices and experiences heard.
Yeah, so I looked at the progress report from the DRC for the 6 months ending last year, and there were 669, I think, submissions that were put in, and really looking forward to hearing for more submissions getting into the commission and including the responses to these issues papers. Interestingly, the schedule of public hearings is on the DRC website. They've just finished 2 weeks looking at the justice system and people with cognitive disability. And I'm looking ahead, there will be public hearings held in Sydney. I don't know whether they'll be open to the public or not, or whether they'll just be virtual, regarding the NDIS coming up later in the year. So they're going to be interesting. But there are lots of other topics that are available as well. I think we've reached the end of time.
No more questions, I don't think, Troy. So yeah, we're.
Thank you for being part of this today. And again, feel free to take what you've got from today and send it straight through to the commission. For some of us, it might be the only thing that we actually get down on paper. Hopefully there'll be more, but start with that, and then you've done it once, and it'll be easy to do a second time. So DRC inquiries at royalcommission.gov.au, or give them a call and give it verbally over the phone. Thanks again for your time, and in your feedback, get back to me about what might be good to do next time in our next webinar. Thanks again.